Well, hello, everybody. It's David Leis here, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. A warm welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining us on this September the 18th, 2025, the year of our Lord. Well, we've had a lot of things going on this past week. It's almost too many to mention. And today I'm very grateful that we can gather around again on our regular Thursday discussion. We've got an extraordinary panel joining us to talk about the issues from Parliament is coming back on stream after a significant break. It's kind of remarkable. So, what are some of the top of line issues that this country faces? What's some important perspectives? So, we're very fortunate that we've got three that. So, we're grateful that you can join us. We've got a lot of regulars coming on here. Hi, Sheridan. Hi, sorry, it says hit the like button, folks, for more great content and moments. Thank you very much for your kind, regular commercial promotion. And it does make a difference. We get thousands of comments from our programs on leaders, and we do appreciate them. They're very thoughtful. And I just want to highlight some of those comments today. It's amazing what you say. This is a blessing to hear this conversation. It's a breath of fresh air. I agree with you. We in Canada are going through a storm. I believe also looking at all that we have been blessed with in Canada. We must keep fighting the good fight. And that's from, I believe, Sheila. Thank you very much. And Superior Interview, questions and answers. I don't agree with all conclusions, but this discussion was one of the better ones I've listened to about our country and current circumstances. And that's from South Hill Farm. So thank you so much. And isn't that the point? When we look at the Frontier Center for Public Policy, we try to inform good public policy that serves Canadians based on evidence, based on a principled approach like accountability, transparency. And we really try to elevate the level of thinking in this country, the level of awareness. And so we hope this program serves you, the audience, and serves our country. So surely that's the spirit in which we have these conversations, and surely in some way that is a positive but challenging venture, and we're really glad to walk with each other. So hello all, Matthew. We've got lots of comments coming in here, so we really appreciate you joining us. So I did want to highlight, as people come on the program, a few top of line news stories, one of which is you may have noticed that the Bank of Canada reduced its prime lending rate by 0.25 percentage points, which is a quarter of a point, as they say. So it decreases from 2.75% to 2.5%. So that's a lowering since March of this past year. And so it's interesting. I know that the governor was asked, are we in a recession? And I think he's looking more positive that there is some growth, but that's one of the debates. What do you think? Or how is your life treating you in the economy? Are we in a recession? It's also interesting that we saw a lot of announcements made regarding major projects or national projects. And so we'll dive into that a little bit today as well. And I would also like to highlight that we had a lot of heartfelt responses to the assassination of a political activist named Charlie Kirk, who's a very articulate spokesperson on behalf of his perspective, a truth, and he would go into different campuses and all kinds of settings, largely around the United States and certainly around the world, speaking his perspective, because he was a believer in the importance of free speech, of discussion, being able to discuss respectfully and civilly different perspectives that we would come to truth. And there he is at, I believe it's at the University of Utah or Valley campus, and just before he was tragically assassinated. So that story continues to unfold. It has certainly sent shockwaves around the world as we come to grips with the significance of freedom of speech in a free and democratic society. And what are the limits of it? Is it appropriate to call for violence? Is it frankly in good taste to be able to call out people who frankly have celebrated that? Our prime minister gave a response to the assassination. He said, I am appalled by the murder of Charlie Kirk. there is no justification for political violence, and every act of it threatens democracy. My thoughts and prayers are with his family, friends, and loved ones. So there were many other responses. In fact, I believe it was a MP, Rachel Thomas from Lethbridge, who also tabled an important motion. And it was a time of unity in the House. And I wanted to share this clip with you today.
Freedom of speech is the cornerstone of a free society. It means we will hear ideas that we disagree with and express views that may be offensive. This freedom can make us uncomfortable or even hurt, but silencing voices, whether for a moment or forever, is never the answer. We must protect a society where people can hold beliefs and share opinions without fear of losing their jobs, being censored, or worse. Charlie Kirk was an outspoken advocate for faith, family, and freedom. Many disagreed with him, some were offended. Tragically, on September 10th, he was assassinated in an attempt to silence his voice. But when has political violence ever been the solution? It destroys dialogue, it undermines democracy, and it breeds fear instead of understanding. True progress comes from persuasion, not intimidation. As we grapple with our personal response to this, may we be honorable in our actions. May we fiercely defend the right of our opponents to speak freely. And may we join our hearts with Charlie's family, his wife Erica, and his 2 young children. Rest in peace.
So there's a picture from the Federal House of Commons in Ottawa as the House, I believe, in unity stood and applauded that motion by MP Rachel Thomas. So well said. So on that note, I wanted to introduce our great panel. I want to introduce the Honorable Dan McTeague, a former Liberal MP, as well as Robert-Falcon Ouellette, former Liberal MP from Winnipeg, and I believe Marco Navarro-Genie. Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie is joining us as Vice President of Policy and Research at Frontier. A warm welcome to all of you gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Hello. Good morning or good afternoon.
So I can't think of a better group of people to reflect and bring us some perspective on this heartfelt tragedy of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. You see a lot of discussion about the importance of free speech. I'm wondering if you could just share with us your perspective on the significance of this. What are your thoughts? Marco, did you want to go first?
Sure. The first thing that struck me about all this, quite funny, is the American singer and close to Trump that tried to tour Canada just a few weeks ago, and because he was there were so many attempts at canceling him, and some successful, of course, and in the scale of victimology and the accusations was, of course, that he was Christian, that he was close to Trump, that he was white. I mean, in fact, many of the things that people accused Charlie Kirk of being were leveled against Feucht, I think was his name. And so that kind of struck me as a parallel. And the fact is that if Charlie Kirk had come to Canada to, say, on a tour of universities, he would have met with with very similar, if not a worse, a reception for those reasons. I'm fairly convinced. But I also thought of Jordan Peterson, who is probably the equivalent in Canada of someone who was persecuted because of what he was doing, essentially standing up against this semi-totalitarian culture of wokeness and identitarianism and all these things. But the parallel sort of ends there, because Peterson, of course, was essentially chased out of town. He's virtually in exile now, and the comparison to Charlie is really the comparison of the choices that Socrates was faced with in ancient Athens, when, of course, he was brought up before a trial and trumped up charges, really. But essentially, the choices for Socrates was either go into exile, which is what we have done with Peterson, or drink the poison, drink the hemlock, and be condemned to death, which is the fate of Charlie Kirk. But it's a most unfortunate thing for anyone wishing to express their views freely in a university campus or anywhere else. And I don't know exactly what this means or will mean later on, but I know that this is a kind of a shift in the ground, and not just in policy, not just we're going to see ramifications of this, most of which I cannot see, that are going to be, I think, very important for the American society, of course, but also for us here in Canada.
Well, thank you very much, Marco. It's interesting that phrase, a shift in the ground, certainly around this issue of the importance of freedom of speech. So well said. Robert, did you want to go next in terms of your reaction?
Yeah, of course. Well, Charlie Kirk, he was very entertaining to watch. I think he had an important role to play in society. He was someone who obviously would challenge a lot of different ideas, and I'd even see clips of him on Instagram or on YouTube once in a while, and they could be very entertaining. He did have his his debate techniques that he used, and I've seen other videos of him. Some people saying, well, there he's being schooled, and here he's winning the debate. But obviously, any form of violence in society, I think, is very destructive, and I think it's just highlights how dangerous life can be. I think we've been through these phases in a number of times throughout the history in the United States, especially Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy Jr., Robert F. Kennedy, and then even Ronald Reagan. And I think this type of violence, I think, is very. I think it just shows how lucky we are to be living here in Canada. See like that type of consensus in the House of Commons, where the MPs were standing together to say any form of violence is unwanted, it's destructive, and we don't believe in it here in our nation. Now, I know in the United States, perhaps there's a larger number of people, and maybe it's more extreme in the U.S. But at the end of the day, if you can't talk to each other, you're not going to build the society you want. And you disagree, and sometimes you can even yell. I've enjoyed having some good yells in the House of Commons sometimes, and I think it's part of the debate, and it's important to democracy. Everything is vocalized on that one place, but it is important to have those debates. And if you can't have it, well, we end up just going down one path and ending up in this kind of this trench warfare over the institutions of government, instead of actually finding out what actually is in the best interests of all of us that live here. And I think Canada, perhaps the way is how cold it is outside, the snow, we do need to work together. We could have not survived the winter if we don't work together in some form with the Indigenous peoples, French peoples, the English, Ukrainians, Italians. Everyone here is in this country.
Well said, Robert. I like the idea that we do need to talk to each other and listen to each other and get along together. So well said. Dan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think Charlie Kirk's assassination really speaks to the cost of truth and freedom and being able to express it, and not to go with the current or whatever is the trend, and to row against that current in ways that many people would find uncomfortable. Conventional ideas tend to come and go. The rigor with which some people hold to their ideas often leads to unfortunate consequences, or consequences where people take these kind of actions in hand, and of course lead to people doing the most destructive of things, the most uncontemplatable things to do. But it has real meaning. I think that Charlie Kirk's message and mission was very much accomplished by being able to open up a dialogue that is desperately needed in not just in country, but also in our institutions of upward thinking, where there seems to be a sort of rigidity with everything that is, and I think Marco referred to this a little earlier, the latest in wokeism or DEI, and to open up his faith and his belief, and a belief and faith that I think has a lot to do with the history of our two nations. Using the word God or Jesus is not anathema to our proud reputation and history of evolution of civilization, not perfect as one might want it to be. But I think his work will certainly go on and encourage others and inspire others not to be afraid to speak the truth and to champion the cause of freedom. I'm old enough to remember when Martin Luther King was murdered, as well as Robert F. Kennedy in 1968 as a young child, not knowing really the implications, but understanding in the fullness of time that what you say has enormous impacts on society. And I think in the case of Charlie Kirk, the murder has probably spawned a greater reaction in those who never gave it much thought. Many of his videos that people may have never seen are now being widely shared, and many of these chapters are now being created, good or bad. But I think it provides balance that we desperately need in society, rather than what we've seen over the past decade or so, which is one-sided and unfortunately a narrative that is certainly left wing that has no place in a pluralistic society, and one, of course, that champions all ideas very much in the Socratic way that Marco referred to a little earlier, having that discussion, that openness, no matter how unconventional or unpleasant the discussions may be, they nevertheless have to take place.
Very good. Well, I'm impressed by all three of you in terms of your response to this tragedy. And I like the idea that we're asking the question, and I think those in the audience are doing this as well, is what can we learn from this tragedy? And how do we understand the opportunity to champion freedom of expression, freedom of speech, as a very important foundational understanding of a value that is just foundational for a free and democratic society? And we need different perspectives and debate and conversation. And I think this is a key takeaway. I'm reminded of someone you may have heard of, and that is Margaret Thatcher, who said a very interesting quote years ago. She said, "The idea that some things are more politically correct than others is not new. It has been the guiding sentiment of tyrants in every age who believe that if you can control what people read and thereby what you think, then you can control them." And I think this is a humbling moment where we need to realize that freedom of speech is so critical to recognize, in many would say out of the Judeo-Christian tradition and other traditions, that every individual is unique and they are entitled to the right to express their perspective. And to be one of the wonderful gifts we can give to each other is to express those perspectives to each other and learn from each other. I mean, I know it sounds like motherhood and apple pie, but I mean, this is really quite a fascinating time, given the kind of reactions there's been. And I want to reflect on a couple of them, one of which is certainly the debate about how is it that a young man, the evidence is not confirmed yet, but it seems to be pointing in the direction that a young man, along with possibly others, took it upon themselves to do this kind of violence. And I know the U.S. administration, I know it's been talked about that they will be declaring different groups like Antifa, the so-called Action Group Against Fascism, a terrorist organization, and going after those funders, including the George Soroses of the world. So that's a very interesting policy development. I think that's certainly worth examining. But you see this in the larger culture where you have different parties by the thousands being canceled because some of them just frankly almost lost the plot. You've got, of course, ABC halts Jimmy Kimmel Live indefinitely after his Charlie Kirk remarks. The late night host, Jimmy Kimmel, came under fire for comments he made in his show about the suspected shooter in the Charlie Kirk's assassination. And it sounds like that is probably the end of Jimmy Kimmel for now. We'll see. And we've got even our own cases in Canada where we've got certain parties that really in utter, in my opinion, really bad taste responded to this tragedy. And even a minister in the provincial government, Manitoba, later retracted their comments, but did not resign. So what are we learning from this kind of next wave of actions and debate about whether or not how should one respond, and what is actually an issue or appropriate freedom of speech? Like, what is appropriate to exercise in terms of freedom of speech, or what is just simply in bad taste, or frankly is going beyond freedom of speech to calling for additional violence or even slander? So who wants to take that one on? I'm curious.
I can
Dan
jump in first
or
if
Marco?
if you don't mind. Um, I'm reminded of the great debates in the 1850s in Britain, um, some of which have tremendous impact on us, the 1850s and 1860s, when they were reforming their institutions. And it's the time when John Stuart Mill published his essay on liberty. And Mill's essay on liberty was principally concerned with freedom of speech, or freedom of expression, as we tend to want to call it in Canada. And the idea is, it's not Mill's idea alone. Of course, this also shows up in the founding documents of the United States, and in the Federalist Papers, that freedom, and particularly freedom of speech or freedom of expression, is a kind of oxygen to a liberal democracy. That without it, it chokes, and so do we all. But Mill was principally concerned not so much with the tyranny of government, but with the tyranny of the majority, the tyranny of individuals against others in society, which is very much what we are living. And it's very pertinent to us, not only because we're also or were once part of the British Empire, and Mill was a tremendous influence on the English-speaking world, but also he was a member of Parliament in 1867 when the British voted for the British North America Act. So there's a few connections there. But specifically about freedom of speech is this idea that without tolerance for the ideas of others, we cannot have a functioning democracy or even a civilized society.
Mhm.
And going back to the Greeks, it was considered barbarian to resort to methods of violence outside argument and speech to deal with one's political opponents. So this is a kind of a form of barbarism that seems to be creeping in our culture, and it's not just the violence of bullets, but it's also somehow the attempts are intimidation and what have you. So this has sort of much larger repercussions. Consider, for example, the professor at the University of Toronto, who tweeted something quite nasty, not just in terms of its vulgarity, but sort of suggesting that other people out here also needed to be shot or worse. And so I wouldn't want governments legislating good or bad taste, because there's plenty of bad taste, and if bad taste was to be legislated, I might end up in prison, or just about anyone else.
I hope,
But
Marco, you're not going to end up in prison.
well, well it's hard to tell these days. But thank you for the sentiment. But the idea is that when we start to legislate things like that, for example, there has been attempts at wanting to legislate what is said on the internet and stuff like that, on the basis of trying to keep us safe. All this is connected in some respects to this idea that without freedom of expression, essentially the oxygen in our free society runs out.
Well said.
Well,
We need that oxygen. Robert?
Thanks, Marco. I actually, when I was the MP, I always enjoyed debate. Even people who might be very disagreeable, some might even qualify as racist. I thought it was good to shine the light on those dark places in our souls.
Absolutely.
And but I will say, Marco, I'm not sure we're too Greek in our society. I think we're almost more Roman than Greek, and I'm not sure how the Romans always fix their issues, but the Ides of March come to mind with Julius Caesar. But Roman society could be very, very violent. But I do like the leadership that we had here in Manitoba. I was talking to a number of veterans after the commemoration of the end of the Second World War that happened at the beginning of September. And Wab Kinew, the premier, gave a speech, and he did talk about Charlie Kirk. He talked about bringing people together. He said no violence was acceptable. But at the same time, having the minister, Nahanni Fontaine, repost I think some very distasteful comments. She was quickly brought into line by, I think, the general Canadian society, as was that university professor. The University of Toronto did not accept those comments and suspended the professor because it is not the violence that she was espousing is not a form of debate and encouraging of free speech. It was actually more of a stifling of that free speech. And I think if we could fall more in line with what we do here in Canada, or if the US could maybe follow the lead of Canada, I think they might be better off in the long term. And I will like to say, Jimmy Kimmel, he is a comedian. That is his role, is to push those boundaries. And I guess he pushed it one step too far. We'll see what the repercussions will be happening with Jimmy Kimmel Live. Maybe he'll be able to come back online or something. But for me, I have to say I was, surprised online how the discourse has slowly changed. I don't know if people are watching this online at all on Instagram, YouTube, and other platforms, but the videos have actually changed. And even just last night, there's a lot more conspiracy theories about was the shooter in Utah a lone gunman, or were there people supporting him? Was this a setup by the American government? Was this a psyops? Questions about the wife of Charlie Kirk. He hasn't even been buried yet, and yet people are already pushing the boundaries on these questions. And they're attempting, I think, a lot of people to make some hay, get some eyeballs on their pages, to perhaps monetize what's going on, to become well known. But this is always, when people speak in public, in the Indigenous tradition anyways, it's very important that we say things that are done in a good way. Even if we might have a truth that we don't think the other person wants to hear, we have to say it in a way that that the person can hear the truth, yet still feel that we can live together. And that is sometimes a fine line to walk. But I'm not sure everyone is living up to the expectations of what responsible citizenship is like in the United States, or sometimes even here in Canada. But it seems that Canada, we've been better able to keep people following perhaps some better values than what they're doing on down in the States.
Okay. Thank you very much, Robert. And Dan, you're also a former MP. Were you able to have debates, and were they pretty respectful most of the time, or did you specialize in demonizing other people? What was that like?
Spot on. Robert really spoke to it. And no, I think generally speaking, with some exceptions, and I was around when someone referred to somebody in a disparaging way and another member decided to take it the wrong way and let's go outside and settle it. We don't do things that way. Although Robert and I know that, the distance between the leader of the opposition and
that was Paul Martin. No, that was Pat Martin. Pat Martin.
It was actually come here, you little sucker, or something like that. I can't remember what his name was. Daryl Stinson and John Canis. And that goes back to 1998, 1999. Now I'm dating myself, hence the gray hair. But a lot can be learned in that process. There are many times I would go into debate, had my notes, had my thoughts, and could be partially convinced of moving in a different direction. And there has been room for that camaraderie in the past. I passed several private members' bills, something that hasn't been heard of late, based on reaching out to other parties and getting consensus. In fact, it was quite often the case. I got more support from the other parties than I got from my own. So that there is a real testament, I think, to what all of this means is that I believe the good that may come of this, despite the tragedy, despite the horror of what we saw, is that the pendulum may be coming back very much to a position of balance to the center, where Marco referred to Socrates earlier, the so-called Socratic dialectic, the ability to speak without consequence, although Hemlock isn't always a great thing for his boss, Aristotle, or vice versa. The reality is that for many of us, much can be learned if we have, and I think one of the key elements in all this, we respect the dignity of the other individual. And I think that's always something, you may dislike them, you may have a real problem with them, but there was never a case where I saw in my heart where you couldn't go out and have a beer or a coffee with the person at the end of the day. You are going to agree to disagree, but because we're humans, we fight to a higher order. And that higher order is, of course, peace, it's freedom, it's truth. Of course, it has a lot to do with respect. And I think perhaps the Americans are learning very much that they need to get back to wherever that should be, where, going one direction or another has lethal consequences of which no one wants. And that's not what their fathers of Confederation or ours or the Constitution or ours really wanted when they put a bunch of people with very disparate views, very different religions at the time. It's something that would have been anathema in any other country, and put them together without having to go to some kind of a war in order to make that happen.
Okay, well said. I like the appeal to humanity here. And as we wrap up this conversation, this part, there's so many lessons to be learned, and the story will unfold. But I just love the themes here in terms of recognizing the absolute importance of freedom of speech for our society, not only because it's a way to find truth and respect other human beings, but it is also a critical element to prosperity. You can't have prosperity if you can't have vigorous debate. And I think what we've got here is a testing of understanding the guardrails around freedom of speech. You don't have freedom to call for violence against other citizens, and you don't have the freedom to slander other people. I mean, this is all things, it's almost like civics 101 here. So let's join hands together. So this has been very good. I love the comments from the audience as well. Kindness, compassion, and community is something we all need to practice, from Kate in the garden. And a peaceful warrior, that is what we are called to be. And that's from A Voice. So really well said. I'm talking with Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie with Frontier, the Honorable Dan McTeague, former MP, and Robert-Falcon Ouellette, also a former MP. So what better group can we talk about than the return of Parliament? It's very interesting in Ottawa this week. We've seen a lot of, a lot of people come together. It's been interesting. It hasn't been sitting that often. I think, what is this day? What is it? 261 or something like that. And they sat for only 21 days. So I'm going to show a little bit of an opening clip here. And I think this has to do with, we'll deal with the leader of the opposition. He actually returned from a bit of a hiatus because he had to run for another seat because he lost it in Ottawa. Maybe we could share that clip right off the bat.
A lot more debt than we ever imagined would be possible. This is a prime minister who said we'd have the fastest growing economy in the G7. We have the fastest shrinking economy in the G7. He said grocery prices would go down. They're going up faster than ever before. He promised to create jobs. He has the second highest unemployment in the G7. He's really reminding us all of that sign at the bar, free beer tomorrow. But you come back the next day and the beer is still not free, and tomorrow never comes. Mr. Speaker, why is it that all of this Prime Minister's promises of yesterday turn into today's disappointments?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think if we are going to build the strongest economy in the G7, and we will, we need to be clear. We need to be clear about the scale of the crisis we are in. We need to be clear about the scale of investment that we need. $60 billion in new projects announced last week. $200 billion in investment announced last week. $100 billion in housing investment announced just yesterday. That's the scale of what we need.
So that's a little bit of an opening of the debates that are going on within the House of Commons between the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition and their respective teams. I'm just curious, what is your take or impression on the opening of this Parliament? Is the tone change for the better? Do you see the emergence of substantive issues? So briefly, Robert, do you want to go first? What are your opening comments?
Well, I think they're sussing each other out there a little bit. They're trying to demonstrate some more of both Carney and Pierre or Mr. Poilievre. I'm not sure about the allegory with the beer. Maybe the case of 24 beer. I'm not sure it works. I think more closer to the bread and butter issues. I think maybe a better allegory for a lot more Canadians. But they are just trying to figure out what sticks. I think the Conservatives are really attempting to just, start poking, onto the facade the Liberals have built and to see what kind of pokes through. And it's going to take a little bit of time. We're going to start knowing within about 2 weeks, I think, what's starting to take hold and where they think the Liberals are the weakest, who's giving the best answers, if there's any weaknesses among the ministers, and if they've over the research, if the operations or the people who do research on oppositions, if they've been able to come up with anything. The Liberals, I think, are still in a really strong position, though. I think Mark Carney, in spite of losing potentially some ministers and others who have been in for a long time who are more experienced within the Liberal caucus. I think he still comes off a very strong position. People are still kind of in the honeymoon phase with him. We'll see how long he can maintain that. It is a minority parliament. He does need to get a budget out. Hopefully the budget will look somewhat good, and there he is. And he seems to be speaking well in the House. He's rather technocratic, and it's not a Justin Trudeau style speaker. He's very much his own person. And I was speaking with Sean Fraser, the Justice Minister, last night. We ran into each other in the airport in Ottawa, and it is a different leadership style. He's a very, very, very different way of doing things, and it's different. It's refreshing, and see what type of results that's going to lead for Canadians.
Okay, thank you, Robert. A different style. What are your observations, Dan?
Yeah, I'm with Robert on this. I think not just different style and different person, Mark Carney versus Justin Trudeau, who had near the end become quite the lightning rod for just about every angst in this country. Also, Pierre Poilievre, I've noticed, more confident in terms of who he is. Of course, he has a very strong riding compared to the one that he lost, and I think perhaps putting a bit of water with his wine, if you will. I think we're going to see a softer side of Pierre Poilievre, very effective, but nevertheless, as they probe to find those soft points in the Liberal cabinet, waiting for several really key events. We're seeing issues on migration, for instance, where the minister there may not be very strong. And I think some of the points that were made after that interaction between the leader and the prime minister showed some concern on that front. Also, rumors of swirling that several former ministers, as to be expected, by the way, are leaving for other jobs. And is that going to be a handful? Is it going to be a brigade? I mean, it looks like there's at least 4 or 5 potential departures, which could have, of course, implications for a strong minority government, making it less stronger, or just leaving things as they are, should Mark Carney continue to be very strong in the polls and continue to receive the support of Canadians. But I think the goodwill and the honeymoon has an end date, always does, whether it was, my time with Paul Martin or Jean Chrétien, we did see that. The question is, how nimble are the policies? And some of the things that make us very, the signature strengths of Mr. Carney for many people is the fact that he could possibly do very well because he was the governor of the Bank of Canada, Bank of England. He would be really good on the fiscal, at least on the monetary side, perhaps even on the fiscal side, and his ability to stand up to Donald Trump, despite the drop of controversy coming every day. I did one yesterday with the Hub talking about the fact that the United States now plans to tariff vehicles, which could be a real important problem for Ontario, and that if that tariff under the USMCA or CUSMA, whatever you want to call it, comes forward that every vehicle that is exported in the United States, more than what we're importing from the United States, could in fact be tariffed at a certain point. That could be real trouble for not only the Ontario economy, but 4 or 5% of your GDP. So there's a number of factors that have to be considered. The one that has me very nervous from experience in 1997, 96, 95 is the size of that deficit. Because if it is what I think it is, and I've said it to David, we talked about this last time we did this a couple of weeks ago. It's 140 billion as a number. As a deficit. It won't be very long before the bond rating agencies take control of that and say, we're back to where we were in 97. The International Monetary Fund becomes your next adjudicator for your finances, and that could put the country in a significant tailspin. Apart from the concerns about migration, apart from the number of people lining up at food banks, apart from some of the social and political problems and economic problems we have in this country, I think Mr. Carney has a massive mess on his hands. Some of it were certainly not his fault, although one could say he was there as an economic advisor for a few years before. But he doesn't inherit a very strong hand, as strong as he may be.
I agree. Well said. And I think you're flagging well a number of key issues, including the fiscal health of this country. Marco, your observations.
I always cringe when people say that this prime minister is different than the last one. Because this is exactly what we used to say about Justin when he came into office, and so different is not necessarily. It doesn't imply either better or worse. It's just different. But what my two friends are pointing out to is the fact that politics in the House is really a game of appearance in some respects, and also a game of substance, as we heard Dan also mentioned a whole host of issues. So on the point of appearance, which let's use the word tone, which we started with in the conversation, I think the tone will have changed and has changed. I'm reminded, of course, of what the former leader of the party called Peter Kent once upon a time on the floor of the House, speaking of maintaining the dignity and the decorum of people and of the process. But Carney is indeed a very different person. His approach is more mature. He's able to talk to the leader of the opposition without essentially falling into insult and what have you, and that will have an effect on the entire House. People often wonder whether one person can make a difference, and one person can always make a difference, provided they put some effort into it and that they are in the right positions. And so Carney is a different person in that sense. So the tone will change, and it will force the leader of the opposition to adapt to that difference. In terms of substance, there is some difference, but not a lot. It is essentially the same lot of people, even though some of them are peeling off. And we should ask more questions about that, because the election was only a few weeks ago, really, a couple of months maybe. And so that people are leaving already sends some signals. Usually the exodus happened before the election. So to see a kind of a potential exodus of important key members 6 months after the elections says something. I'm not really sure what's going on there, but it's certainly an indication of something that may be going on inside that caucus. That said, a great deal of the agenda from this parliament is very similar to the agenda of the last parliament. What is kind of interesting, of course, is that a good deal of the agenda of this new government is also the agenda of the opposition in the last parliament. So that should temper things to some extent. But a good deal of the rest of the agenda will probably pop up. The fact that carbon taxes are not gone and will not be gone. Some of them will remain, and some of them might be revved up. This idea that we can control free speech on the internet on the basis that we need to protect people. Issues related to crime, finance, economy, all these things are very similar. I was very surprised to hear the Prime Minister talk about the depth of the crisis, considering that who's behind that crisis, and what policies have led to this crisis today. Those questions need to be asked. But it's good to see them back in action. I think um, Canadians should be somewhat upset. I think that it took so long for Parliament to be reconvened. If we are in this crisis, and this crisis has the depth that the Prime Minister suggests, the House should have been sitting uninterruptedly. If you so happy to see them back. We'll see whether the tone stays, but there are issues of substance that need to be addressed, and so it's good to see these people.
But
well said.
But I think
Robert?
for me, like the issue is like a lot of the people that seem to be leaving were left out of cabinet, and I think they've gone back to being the life of a regular member of parliament, and that might not be the lifestyle they enjoy. You have to really enjoy the constituency work. You have to really enjoy the humdrum of parliament, doing those mundane tasks, and you don't have a huge staff. And there's no one driving you around. There's no one following you around, taking down notes of what you're saying. It's a different lifestyle. And I'm sure Dan knows quite a bit about that. He's had the chance of being in those two roles. I've only been a basic backbench MP, the purest of the MPs. But it is very different. And I think some of them are looking at that thing, thinking to themselves, well, this is likely the end. Do I want to remain doing this for another 3 years? 5 years? Is there something else or another way I can contribute? But I would like to say, Marco, the idea of free speech, yes, there are internet bills coming up on free speech, but there are also other bills coming up on free speech surrounding terrorism and symbolisms of terrorism, apparently. And I think that's this could be, maybe we need to put all this together and have a larger debate about what type of restrictions we should have on any symbolism in society.
If any.
If any, yeah, I'm actually much more libertarian on this. I like having debate. I think if someone wants to raise a very disturbing flag, which has connotations of perhaps genocide or other ideals attached to it, let people do that so we know who they are and I know who I'm dealing with, instead of just hiding it and not really knowing quite what's going on. Because if you can't shine a light on it, if you can't discuss it, if you can't point out the weaknesses in their arguments and the weaknesses of their thoughts, Canadians won't know what's the best course of action and who they should actually be following.
Well said. Dan, do you enjoy being driven around and chauffeured?
I hardly had a chance when I was up there. Usually it was punted to all the tough, the second embassies around the world, and how to handle consular affairs. So it never very exciting, usually very tragic. But no, there was a difference. And the difference was simply that you had two places to work. There was I think a poster from the Globe and Mail where I was hot buttons in politics, and it had me on two phones. One, back in those days, we used BlackBerry, was a BlueBerry from the department side during the election. The other one was my political one for my as an MP. But Robert is right. I mean, there's no, for those of us who were trained to become members of Parliament, I was one of them. I started back in 1980, 81. It was the penultimate, and it wasn't about having people salute you when you walk in the foyer of the House of Commons. It was that you got to do things that truly did help people, and you could make a difference. And Robert and I have shared experience where if you were just a normal person who is not holding public office, chances are you couldn't have made that difference. So that was really the end goal in all this. It doesn't sound like it's like, hey, aren't we great because we have honorable or whatever beside our name because we have a driver. It's what we're able to do with it. If you can improve someone else's life and do for them what they couldn't do for themselves, then that's absolute gold. In fact, it's platinum.
People are also peeling off the PMO. I'd like to point out that Mr. Lemeri recently announced to be a principal secretary, is already on his way out. So it's not just people who don't who miss their limousines, because Ms. Freeland, of course, is still also a minister of the Crown. So there, I get to the point that Robert makes, and I agree, but there may be something else going on.
Okay, so
well, I do know that I have heard Mark Carney has been a little bit more directive in the style of leadership. It's not as free willed as Trudeau was. I think he's, your suits and ties are de rigueur and being on time, maybe basic things, but I think, and if you don't come prepared, I've heard he can be very, very direct. If you do not know the answer for it, do not BS me through responding and coming up with something off the top of your head. Come back with the facts, get me the information, and we'll make a decision. So I kind of have this feeling he actually might be a little bit more centralized in some of the decision making, just following up and making sure people are really dotting those I's and crossing those T's. But I do agree with Marco. He does have a lot of hard choices ahead. And with Dan, what is the size of the deficit? If you're saying 140 billion, Dan, like that, I've never heard that number. That will lead to some major crunches at some point in priorities right across the country.
Okay, so I did want to pick up on some of those key policy issues. If we look at the deficit, I mean, let's be clear, we still don't have a budget. I know there's the date, I believe it's November 3, where a budget will be tabled. I mean, obviously the principle of accountability is important. We got to get this economy going. Canadians are hurting in so many respects. So I wanted to bring up a Nanos poll here that shows some of the issues on Canadians' mind. Now, this is obviously a poll from this past week. The top 10 issues. We've got things such as, gosh, I can barely read the print here, but I believe it has to do with the economy. We've got, Madam Producer, I can just barely read some of those things, but economy's in the top area. We've got, of course, Donald Trump at the top there. The legacy media loves Donald Trump and Orange Man bad. It's all his fault. We've got other issues as we go down the line there, but the economy's right up there. So my question is, where is the substantive addressing of the issues that ail this country? And I wanted to, because we heard during the elections the phrase think bigger and act bigger, and there was a talk about the national project list. So I want to get that into a moment, but I want to do a clip from the energy minister, Hodgson, who talks about projects that are coming up here in this country.
Last night, Canada and British Columbia approved the new Silicem LNG export terminal in northern British Columbia. It's with the Niska Nation. It will be the second largest private sector investment in the history of this country. The second largest in the history of this country. It will employ thousands of Canadians. We would love the Conservatives to help us build Canada.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the question was not about re-announcing a previously approved project. It was about the cost of food.
Okay, so that's an interesting clip there where there seems to be some positive momentum going forward. And then there's a follow-up interview with the minister on the CBC relative to carbon competitiveness and net zero. So I found that a very interesting revelation about how this government policy is thinking about these energy projects.
We will work to get to the right endpoint. The right endpoint is getting pathways built, reducing the carbon intensity of our oil industry. And what the Prime Minister has said is if we get that done, we are open to working with potential proponents on a pipeline.
The government, the Prime Minister, keeps talking about climate competitiveness, carbon competitiveness, sort of things that I don't think I fully understand at this stage, because there's strategies that will come later. Does this mean that Ottawa is taking a different approach to fighting climate change, that we're trying to find the best path forward as opposed to hitting necessary targets?
So the Prime Minister and Minister de Bruzen are leading this discussion. Their goal is clear. It's the same goal that Alberta has. It's the same goal industry has, which is to get to net zero. We are working on how we do that. We care about the result. The result is to get to net zero. Everybody shares that long-term goal. This is a win. I really think Canadians should be really excited that we have a win, that everyone believes this is the right thing, and we're working hard to do that.
So help me, gentlemen, is this the same Trudeau government with a different tone, with different suits on? Because we still have the same policies in place where, certainly on the energy file, we still have these, I think, disastrous legislation like C-69. It's no wonder that there was no pipeline announced within those national energy projects. So as long as that happens, Canada still continues to sell its energy at a discount. We still continue to be a price taker, not a price maker. We don't get world market prices. And the punchline is we still forfeit, what is it, 40, 60, 70 billion dollars a year. I mean, this is almost hard to imagine that any rational country would shoot off its own feet. So are we dealing with the same policy? Help me understand this. Who wants to dive on that one? Dan, do you want to go first?
Well, look, I mean, we have to resolve net zero, yes or no. I mean, no one talked net zero 10, 15 years ago, but the fact that we're saying we can do all this, we couldn't do it for the past 10 years, but now we can do it because we sort of found a little way around, a little bit of wiggle room here and there. I mean, you're either for it or not. Net zero doesn't just confine to, CO2 coming out of the ground or being produced as a result of a byproduct of oil and gas. It also brings in the EV mandates, it brings in the carbon tax, the first one and the second one, which we're paying for. It brings in emissions on caps on emissions. It brings green municipal funds. There is a bevy of issues that are subordinate, that are directly connected to net zero. And the discussion that we haven't had in this country, because it was settled, it's not settled. And I don't think even scientists will find that settled. Speak to Stephen Koonin, Obama's science advisor. It's not settled. Wrote a book about it. But apart from that, the discussion has to be around saying, well, yeah, you can get your oil pipelines as long as you sequester, as long as you capture the carbon and put it in the ground. And I think there is no other country in the world that I know of that has that kind of economic potential, which is demonstrable, which represents 10 to 15% of your economy, which is really saying you must condition any future projects based on decarbonization. I mean, for a lot of people, the three elements that are critical: your water, your oxygen, your carbon. Without those three things, we as a civilization go extinct. Nevertheless, I think the question that has to be answered, and the Liberals are starting to answer it one at a time. They're giving up their EV mandates. They got rid of the second carbon tax. They're probably going to get rid of the emissions caps, which I think is why Danielle Smith is smiling, which surprised me a little bit. But at the end of all of this, I think one by one, these goals, these ideals that were formulated in other parts of the world under the assumption that CO2 is going to kill the world and the planet, have now had to be somewhat sequestered or put aside, because we have to deal with the fundamental reality, which is a declining economy, because we're not getting our resources to the rest of the world, despite the rest of the world wanting them openly and very, very vociferously.
Okay, Robert, is that your take as well, that this government seems to be backing away slowly but surely from those kind of
it certainly is a very strong impression. I have spoken with a number of people who work in the environmental movements and some activists, and they're not very happy with the government. I think this actually opens up an opportunity for the NDP on the left side at some point, if they can pick a leader, someone that can have a little bit more. Anyone actually. They need to get someone that could connect with Canadians and a little bit more authentically than old Jagmeet Singh. But I think this, for the moment, I think the Liberals are trying to turn to the right a little bit, try to eat the pie or the cake or where the Conservatives sits. And they might be somewhat successful at it, and I'm not sure. I think even the deficit, this whole idea, if you have to judge people, and look at Pierre compared to Mark, or when you were looking at Pierre compared to Justin, you have to look at them and say, who's better at managing this situation? At the beginning, Trudeau he looked very capable of building this very pluralistic society, and that's what people wanted. And then at the end, it seemed he was no longer up to the task after COVID and all the ripple effects on the economy. And it seemed that Pierre was the man to be able to bring the needed change and a different vision for the country. But I think if you're looking at a deficit, who would people want, Mark or Pierre? And I think that's going to be the challenge for Pierre, is trying to demonstrate that he's still very relevant against Mark Carney. And even the issue of the deficits, who's to blame for that? Well, we already know the answer. We're going to blame Justin Trudeau. And we're going to blame him pretty severely. That was the previous government. That's not my government. A different style, different administration, different people. And maybe even it's wanted to see some ministers leave the front or people leave the government, get new people in. You mentioned Steve Guilbeault leaving potentially. That's a very strong environmentalist. And if he goes, I think that sends a very strong message that they're charting a completely different course.
Interesting. Very good insights there. So Kenzie Kraken says, I believe there's a comment up above, Madam Producer, that talks about net zero and the whole issue of it being almost analogous to COVID-19, that this is all going to be a point of great impact. That's Kenzie Kraken, I believe it is, on a comment here. In any case, thank you for all the audience's comments here. Marco, your observations, do you hold some of these glimmers of hope that there's a different change in policy here with this government?
Well, people who have recently or at any given point read Mark Carney's book would know that he is a dyed-in-the-wool radical environmentalist, and that he helped to reshape the world of finance to push this idea of net zero. The reality, though, is different. People everywhere else, and outside of Canada especially, have begun to step away from net zero. The reality is, yeah, you could get to net zero, but two things are going to be necessary. Either we go back to horse and buggy, as somebody I saw commented, or the expense of having net zero would be such that life would be unaffordable. Right, right now, for example, Western Canadians are in the middle of the harvest, and there's been a little too much rain in southern Saskatchewan, for example, lots of fog, lots of humidity. That means that you have to spend an enormous amount of energy drying the crops, right? And if you keep piling taxes upon taxes upon taxes on many of these fuels, that means that even a great crop, like apparently we're going to have this year, is going to be so expensive because you have to spend all this money keeping it dry and preventing it from going moldy, et cetera, et cetera. That's just one aspect of the economy in which this idea of net zero keeps piling up costs upon costs upon costs. And of course, right now, in some respects, inflation has sort of inched down a little bit, but it also is creeping up on food. And sure, I don't go and buy IKEA furniture every day, so who cares if it's double the price or whatever. But I do eat like most Canadians, or go to restaurants and what have you. And so the cost of food is becoming more of an issue now than it was even a few months ago. Bottom line is all these net zero policies, regardless of these wonderful intentions, tend to pile up so much on the costs that drive the costs up, drive inflation, and make it even more difficult for a government trying to walk away from what they call this crisis.
I think you're right. So, and I like the way you highlighted, Marco, there's been a moderation of overall inflation, but there's still a fairly persistently high level of food inflation. If we look at grocery prices, I believe we're just tabled this week, they're up 3.4%. I notice I have never been so surprised by the inability to take a second take on the price of ground beef. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Ground beef.
Let alone coffee prices. It's just incredible. Like I just think that people that, your eyes pretty well pop out as you go grocery shopping these days. Surely that's going to impact this government's willingness to take definite initiatives to try to make it easier for Canadians to survive here. So, Dan, I'm going to turn to you. You have been a leader at examining gas prices over the years. I mean, you're constantly in the media talking about them. What's the status of the carbon tax now and its impact? What's driving inflation on food and prices at the pump?
Well, I'd say you'd have Professor Sylvain Charlevoix come on and speak about this. He did talk about the fact that, believe it or not, even the retaliatory tariffs have a lot to do with driving up the price of food. But beyond that, it may very well be small things that we don't take into consideration. But working from the energy point of view, I know that one of the biggest taxes we pay, and this may come as an entire surprise to all your listeners, is the Canadian dollar. Because it takes 138 pennies to buy a US dollar, that adds 24 cents a liter to the price of gasoline. I don't know of any tax, federal, provincial, that's that high. We import products from the United States or products that are valued in US commodities. That means that we lose about a third of our purchase power. And so I'm not surprised at these pressures, but we need to get that right to understand that, we can't have extraordinarily low prices, but at the same time, we also have to, take into account the demographic shifts in Canada that have been seeing us with take on a much larger number of people than even our own advisors in the Department of Immigration and others would have suggested in terms of what is a sustainable immigration policy. And that brings us into a whole different area. The cost of living issue is going to continue to mount as people realize that jobs aren't as plentiful, demands are even greater. The cost of living continues to rise, and whether it is driven by a weak Canadian dollar or higher taxes, or whether it's driven by, really a lack of understanding and appreciation that some of the renewables, green energy policies have driven up hydro rates across the country. Now, some places get subsidies, that's great, but we have to look at the issue of energy because it really is very much central to the cost of living and to the concerns that people have about being able to make ends meet. And I'm not tooting my own horn. I did spend a lot of time on this issue many times as both a member of parliament and post my time as in the private sector. But the reality, I think, is that where the Liberals are going to have to focus their attention on is how to get the ship back up and floating again. Because right now, a lot of people believe that their noses are under the waterline.
Right on. So let's get this country moving again. So as we look to wrapping up our conversation, I'm wondering, what do we need to do to get our country moving again, economically and otherwise? We've been kind of in an age of stagnation here. We've had very tepid economic performance. And I think many Canadians, I can speak for them, would say we need to move our country forward. So, Robert, what would be the top of mind recommendations if you were the top advisor to the Prime Minister?
Well, I think we need to not invest so much in the military. I know that's been a talk that we need to, but if we look at the priorities of Canadians, that was low down on the list, and I think it comes down to jobs. We need to be out there looking to create jobs here in the country. I know we want to purchase submarines, and I know South Korea has submarines they want to sell us, but we are going to purchase a lot of military equipment. What are the economic spin-offs for Canadians in good paying engineering jobs? And what are we doing with technology? I know the government, the Trudeau government had these super clusters in technology and agriculture. Where has that gotten us yet? And has that spun off into more jobs and other things that we're able to just create wealth among Canadians? And I think we also need to control the level of immigration. I think there was a consensus for a number of years around the levels, 300, 250, 300,000, 350. And I think we've gone far beyond that. And it does create stresses in the housing market. It creates stress among the jobless rates among young Canadians right across the country. And this is unfortunate because it's going to lead to young Canadians not having that experience to be able to get those high paying jobs. And it's going to leave them a little bit farther behind and delay that adulthood that's so important for the long-term earning potential of people in life. And so I would be focusing on those things and just the level of productivity. Mark Carney he should be very good at this. He's an economist. He should be looking about how we actually get more productive as a society, what we can do to actually get more out of the workers that we have. develop more wealth and in areas where we add value. Even in agriculture, once I had the ambassador for Turkey come to Western Canada, and I took him around a little bit, and he wanted to see pulses, so beans. And I asked him, why are you here to see beans? Well, we want to buy the beans from Canada. We send them to Turkey. They process them, they repackage them, and then we sell them back to Canadians. And I thought to myself, wow, they're adding value to our raw materials. They're doing all these great things, and we're losing out on that. And perhaps you think to yourself, well, how much value is in a bean? Well, it's all those little things that add up that make a really great economy.
No, it's a good example, Robert. Well said. Marco, what do we need to do to get this country moving?
I don't disagree with Robert's points, but I think I'm reminded of the old expression that when you are in a hole, you should stop digging. And the government keeps pumping money into the economy, increasing the volume of money. And when we increase the volume of money, what happens? We create inflation and we devalue the money that people make. So this is an issue that we need to tackle, right? If Dan is right that the deficit will again be in excess of $100 billion, that is increasing dramatically, continuing to increase dramatically the volume of money. The other thing that needs to happen, of course, is that no society gets itself out of poverty or advances without a strong and inexpensive supply of energy. So we need to figure it out, especially in a country like ours, where, depending on what place in the country you are, it's cold most of the year. We spend a lot of energy per capita, and I know people blame us for that. But the reality is we live where we live, and, that's not going to change. And the other issue, of course, is if we don't contain the issue of food inflation and the lack of housing, we are looking at essentially more unrest, people more unhappy, not to mention the amount of suffering that we're putting lots of people through given the situation. So those are things that, in my mind, require some urgency.
Right on. Well, that brings to an end this far-reaching conversation with our panel. I want to thank Marco and Robert and, of course, the great Dan McTeague for joining this conversation about Parliament and also recognizing the larger significance out of the tragedy of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So I want to thank you for joining us, gentlemen. And it's been great to have this conversation.
Thank you, David.
And on that note, I want to thank our audience as well. It's been a vigorous discussion, so to speak. And I want to just also point out that on the Frontier website is, I think, 12 policy ideas to move this country forward. I encourage you to look at them. I think there's solutions to every one of these areas, in our humble opinion. So we want to thank you for joining this conversation, and be sure to join us the same time, the same place on Thursday next week. And in the meantime, I wish you a great time for you and your family.
Thank you for watching